That's a tough one to follow. I was actually originally given the assignment of doing a little history of Daddy, and I kind of halfway through that, and if any of you would like to receive that, just give me your email address and I'll give it to all the family when I do it. But I came up with something else about, it's been going on 2 years ago. I thought, I don't want to wait till Daddy's gone to say thank you. And so I just started kind of wildly jotting down things and randomly, they're very random, and I typed it all up and I gave it to Daddy. Next time I came back, he said, you know, I really like that, what you wrote to me. He said, I've just read that over and over again. So I'd like to share it with you, and I'd like to say it. I know he's not here, his body is not here, but I'd like to say it as if I'm talking to him, if you don't mind, if you'll bear with me. Thank you, Daddy, for accepting God's great gift of salvation, as Jill so beautifully shared with us. You know how different our lives would be. We could be hopeless. I don't know. God has his chosen people, and we probably may have met him someplace along the way, but none of us would be married to the spouses we have, or a lot of other things in our lives if it hadn't been for Daddy and Mom accepting God's great gift of salvation. And thank you, Daddy, so much for loving all of us kids and grandkids alike. You know, did you ever see anything like it? It was for his unbounded affection that he's always shown, you know, not only to the 6 of us, but then to the grandchildren, then to the great-grandchildren, and let's not forget those great-great-grandchildren who are so precious to us, and they were to him. And I just, you know, Jen and I were talking today that if you were one of his kids or grandkids, you always felt like you were his favorite. You knew you weren't because they were all the favorites, right? But you were still special. You were a favorite to him. Our son Jim, when about the time Mom died, he went to visit Mom as she was leaving us to go to be with the Lord. And he and Daddy just sat down and visited. And Jim hadn't been living for the Lord, and he said that Daddy just sat down with him and shared some scriptures and shared some testimony with him. And Jim said, I just did not feel at all like he was saying, this is the way you should be living. But God spoke to him through whatever Daddy shared with him. And then to top it all off, that evening, they went up to sleep up where Mom and Dad had lived in the trailer, and there was Mom's Bible there. And Jim opened that Bible, and it said, all ye that labor and are heavy laden, come unto me, and I will give you rest. Take your yoke upon you, my yoke upon you, and learn of me. And Jim said, Lord, this is what I want to do. I want to take that. I want to live for you. So how many times did God use both Mom and Dad in so many different ways? Thank you, Daddy, for being a great example. I think Oli alluded to it a little bit, of always doing the job well. You know, so many people grow up without that, but we had that example. If a job was worth doing, it was worth doing well, and we grew up that way. And I think it shows in my brothers and sisters, I know that, and then my children and so forth. And thank you for instilling in us the confidence that we could do a good job at whatever came our way. You know, he started allowing us at an early age to demonstrate that confidence that he had in us. When I was 9 years old, Daddy was in the restaurant business, and I was 9 years old when I started working in the root beer stand. And now I think back about, wow, 9 years old, you know. And later on, I worked up and worked in the other restaurant, and he was confident. There was never any question about could you do the job or would you do it right or anything. You just did it. And I look back and I think, oh yeah, that really made a difference in my life. I thank you, Lord and my dad, for maintaining a good relationship with his parents and his siblings, because that's important to us. And see that example of maintaining those relationships. He didn't hold grudges, as everybody said. You never heard him speaking meanly or disparagingly about anyone, and that's a good example to all of us. I thank him, thank you for that family vacations and the trips, although he was very, very busy businessman. He took the time, and we have such fun memories of Jackie catching lots of frogs and all kinds of good things. And for the times, too, that he took us to family gatherings and family reunions and so forth, because those impacted our lives, and we've been able to maintain an ongoing relationship with our bigger family as well. And then I thank you, Daddy, so much for being interested in what goes on in our lives, and for being a good listener. You know, sometimes as people, he's always like that. And I remember one day when I was working for him, I was like 14, and he took me home after work from their job at the restaurant. And he said, well, Judy, he said, who's the big moment? Meaning, what boy was I interested in? And he had a great sense of humor in the way that he'd ask you things, but he was always interested. And even up until the last time I talked to him, which was, days ago, it was always, how are you? It wasn't, oh, I'm just having a hard time, It was, how are you? And what are you guys up to today? When are you coming to visit? And of course I'd say, well, Dad, how are you doing? Well, he says, I'm kind of lazy. He says, I think I'm getting old. Judy, don't ever go old. And I say, too late, Dad. Sorry. But he kept that positive. It wasn't an inward looking at me in my sufferings, because he did suffer various illnesses and maladies. But he was always looking outward, and one strange thing that just kind of hit me one day was, we were talking about our granddaughter, Jen's daughter, Tamra, and he said, well, her husband's name is Jason, isn't it? And I'm like, he'd never even met him, you know? But he kept that interest in all from, the oldest ones down to, Micah's tiniest ones, and Ryan's kids, and all of them. He was always interested in all of them, and I thank you, Dad, up there, wherever you are. I thank you for working hard to provide a good living before he went into the mission, and that kind of course, showed us the responsibility that each one of us has assumed, and we were talking this morning about passing the baton on. Now, Jaci and Jan have been helping us here with the arrangements, and Mike and all of you guys, it's just it's a blessing that he showed us that good work ethic and good idea of responsibility, and we're being able to pass it on to our children as well. And along the same line, and of course I thank him for trusting God to provide, because once we left the restaurant, and Lenny here can remember when her parents and our parents went off to New Tribes together, and how God provided, and he would tell me the story again and again about when we were in boot camp. I don't know how long we've been there, and we always went to town on Friday, and he said, Judy, you said, well, Dad, aren't we going to town tonight? Because there didn't seem to be anybody going in that direction. And I didn't know they didn't have money. They just didn't always sit around and tell us we don't have money for this or for that. And he said, I don't know what he said, but he always loved to tell the story about this envelope. That very evening came under the door with some provision for us to be able to go to town and get our weekly groceries. And that was just the beginning of God's wonderful provision, and teaching us to depend on the Lord to provide for us all those years that so many of us have been on the mission field. Not necessarily that in our own, if you work here, but it's been an example of trusting God for his provision. I thank my daddy, for being a great example of submissiveness to authority. When we were in boot camp, they went through some hard times there, and I was a teenager, and, you know, not necessarily rebellious, but I was, once again, I like boys. And there was a young man who was not of the mission, and he had asked me to go out on a date. And the mission director called me in and said, I don't think he's your type. Well, I was a little like, hey, what do you mean? You know, that should be my parents' you know, decision. That shouldn't be yours. You know what? You know, Mom and Dad took that so well, and they didn't say, yeah, that's our job, that's not his place. They were just an example to not be riled and rebellious about these things, but to take these things that come into our lives as lessons, ways to learn submissiveness to God, you know, through all that. And in the same token, not holding grudges. I mean, not only toward relatives, but toward anybody else. And I thank you, Daddy, for being so generous, patient and generous. It was such a good example to us. How many people have they, through the years in the mission, have they shared with? Maybe they've touched your lives, not just financially, because they never had a lot of money, but they gave their time and their lives. I don't know how many people were counseled by Mom and Dad. And that's also a heritage. You know, John and I now have people coming to us and we kind of look at each other like, you know, we didn't tell them that we could help them out or anything. But they see in us that same, you know, some godliness or some common sense or whatever it is that Mom and Dad also had so much of, and they're drawn to that as people. So many people were drawn to Mom and Dad for that counseling, and they gave generously of their time, their energy, and their resources. And then I thank him that he sacrificed, I'm sure a lot of times, that we didn't know what a sacrifice it was. When Mom and Dad left boot camp, I had gone my first year of high school to a Christian high school. And I really, really missed it. And I was 2 years in the high school in the mission. And then my senior year, I wanted to go back there. It was up in North Dakota, and by this time, Mom and Dad were at Woodworth. And they said, we can do that for you. Now, I know it was a sacrifice for them to do that. And they said, okay, I'll tell you what, you know. You can go to Uncle Doyle's and work this summer, and you can buy your new clothes, whatever you need, and we'll pay the tuition for the year and take care of you up there. And they sacrificed without making it seem like a sacrifice, too. They did it so graciously that you didn't feel like, oh, well, they're having to penny pinch in order to do it. They were just generous and loving. And so I thank you, my dear Daddy and parents, for all the examples, for all the gifts that you gave us. They're innumerable. And I would just like to say one more thing. Thank all of you. I know that Oli already has, but I thank especially my siblings and all my related people here for all that you've done in taking care of my dad. You don't know what that means to me. All these years, for Joanna especially, and her family, but not only her, Jill and Derek have sacrificed. Jackie has sacrificed many times to be in the hospital with Daddy. Jill and Larry have come when it's been so far, and to say nothing of the prayers and gifts that have been given on Daddy to Mom and Dad. So I want to thank you, and then for the guests who are here today. I know I've been so excited just to meet the different ones, you know, Lenny and Margie and all these people that, John Garber, that I haven't seen in so many years, and thank you so much for coming from all of us. And once again, if you want me to send you that history, just give me your email address.
Jaci shot an uncle, Larry's grandfather, at least a portion of scripture for us.
Grandpa loved to quote scripture, and it's one of my favorite, most precious memories of him, and if you got to spend any time with him, it's probably one of yours too. I'm going to read just 6 verses from Isaiah 53. Who hath believed our report, and to whom is the arm of the Lord revealed? For he shall grow up before him as a tender plant, and as a root out of a dry ground. He hath no form nor comeliness, and when we shall see him, there is no beauty that we should desire him. He is despised and rejected of men, a man of sorrows and acquainted with grief, and we hid as it were our faces from him. He was despised, and we esteemed him not. Surely he hath borne our griefs, and carried our sorrows. Yet we did esteem him stricken, smitten of God, and afflicted. But he was wounded for our transgressions, he was bruised for our iniquities. The chastisement of our peace was upon him, and with his stripes we are healed. All we like sheep have gone astray. We have turned every one to his own way, and the Lord hath laid on him the iniquity of us all.
Before we conclude our time in prayer, we're going to listen to a medley of 3 songs that Larry loved. So just sit back and listen and think about the message of what you're going to hear.